Hello and a very warm welcome to a decidedly dreich Westminster for November's Scottish Questions. Because the way the parliamentary timetable works, this is in fact the final Scottish Questions of 2012. So we'll see if there's any Christmas goodwill on offer a little bit early amongst our MPs. As you'd expect, the economy and the Scottish independence referendum featured prominently in the questions to the Scottish Secretary Michael Moore. Here's how proceedings got underway.
Order. Questions to the Secretary of State for Scotland, Mr. Lindsay Roy.
Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK Government firmly believes that Scotland is and always will be better off in the UK. The UK Government is undertaking a programme of analysis to evaluate how Scotland contributes to and benefits from being part of the UK.
Lindsay Roy.
Can I thank the Minister for that answer? Can I also ask him to explain to the House why there's so much concern amongst those working in the defence and supply chain industries in Scotland over the future of their jobs?
Mr. Speaker, I can advise the honourable member that as at April there were 15,880 regular armed forces and MOD civilian personnel based in Scotland and an additional 40,000 people employed in defence-related industries in around 800 companies. Not one of those people could guarantee their job under an independent Scotland.
Mr. James Gray.
Speaker, the SNP's commitment to a nuclear-free Scotland would presumably mean the end of Trident, the end of the Vanguard submarines that carry it, the end of Forsyth. Am I right in thinking that means something like 6,500 jobs in Scotland? Does the Minister think they would actually be replicated elsewhere, or would they be people who would simply lose their jobs thanks to an SNP government?
And James Gray is a Tory MP for Wiltshire.
Speaker, I can in fact advise the honourable gentleman that by 2020 there will be 8,000 jobs based at Fastlane following an announcement of an additional 1,500 jobs recently by the Secretary of State for Defence. There is absolutely no certainty what would happen to anybody employed in the Ministry of Defence or defence industries in Scotland under an independent Scotland.
Mr. Stuart Housey.
Speaker, the list of recent investment and job announcements in Scotland has been quite remarkable, particularly in the renewables sector. The Minister will know there was 2.3 billion of completed projects to July this year and a future pipeline of 9.4 billion with many thousands of jobs attached. Each of those investment decisions have been taken in the sure and certain knowledge that the referendum is coming and independence is likely. Why does the Minister think these investment decisions continue to be made, and why is nobody listening to his scare stories?
Mr. Speaker, I do not agree with the honourable gentleman's analysis. These investments are taking place despite the uncertainty, not because of it. And I tend to agree with the Chief Executive of Agreco, who gave evidence yesterday to one of the committees of this Parliament when he said that the supposed benefits of independence are small, tenuous and unlikely to arise, whilst the dangers are large and serious.
Mr. Stuart Housey.
The Minister mentions uncertainty. The only uncertainty we've seen was the massive increase in the North Sea supplementary charge, with no discussion with the sector. The uncertainty for employees, now this government are making it easier to sack people. Is it not the case, as Douglas Sawyers from CURRAN said when he made a significant investment earlier this year, that in the event of independence, the Scottish Government's approach will be to make Scotland more, not less competitive? And is that not the truth? Instead of scare stories, we're actually going to move to independence, where the government will make Scotland more, not less competitive.
Mr. Speaker, when the people of Scotland have a decision on independence in the referendum, they must be sure that that decision is a long-term decision. Independence is not for Christmas 2014, and if the honourable gentleman looked at the report of the IFS, he would see that they say that an independent Scotland would face much harder decisions than the rest of the UK in the longer term.
Anas Sarwar.
Speaker, the Minister will be aware that 30,000 Scots are employed by UK government agencies to work as civil servants in Scotland, including for the Department of International Development has 450 staff members in East Kilbride. What would happen to those jobs if Scotland voted for independence, and has there been any clarity from the SNP?
Mr Speaker, there has been no discussion between the SNP or indeed the Scottish Government and the UK Government about the future of defence-based jobs in Scotland, or indeed civil service jobs, or indeed any other jobs. Those people in those jobs face, as everybody else does, great uncertainty if Scotland were to become independent.
Mr Bob Blackman.
Question number 2, Mr Speaker.
And this is a question from a Tory MP about the role of the Electoral Commission in the independence referendum.
The agreement reached between the United Kingdom and Scottish governments recognises the importance of the independent Electoral Commission, and that the referendum should be based on the normal rules for referendums held across the United Kingdom.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Clearly it's important that all parties respect the independence of the Electoral Commission. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that if the SNP administration in Scotland were to ignore the advice of the Electoral Commission, it would taint the whole question of the process and call into question whether the referendum was fair?
My honourable friend is right to highlight the expertise and the experience of the Electoral Commission, which is indeed a highly respected institution. And I don't think it would be in the interests of the Scottish Government or any nationalists to put themselves against the advice of the Electoral Commission when that comes forward.
Karen Lumley.
Thank you, Speaker. Does the Minister share concerns that the referendum question submitted by the Scottish Government to the Electoral Commission is weighted in favour of a positive outcome?
I understand the concerns that people have with the particular formulation put forward by the Scottish Government. However, I think that the Electoral Commission, with its great experience, great expertise and its trusted status, is in the right position to do the right procedures and test it. I'm ready to stand by the advice it gives. I hope the Scottish Government is too.
And Karen Lumley is the Tory MP for Redditch.
Does the Minister accept that while the Electoral Commission might be a trifle wishy-washy on occasions, it is necessary to have an impartial body deciding these important questions, like the question of the question, because the alternative is to have separatists both referee and player in these circumstances, and it is simply unacceptable to have a side which is arguing on one side of the argument also deciding the rules.
I quite agree with the eminent chair of the Scottish Affairs Committee, and he and his colleagues have been carrying out a whole series of investigations into this issue and others about independence. I think that the referendum has to be seen to be fair to both sides. We cannot possibly have a set of circumstances at the end of this process where folk are calling into question the outcome. That's why we've laboured long and hard to get a referendum that's legal, fair and decisive, and I hope the Scottish Government will accept the Electoral Commission's advice.
Anne McKechin.
Speaker, given that any proposal to extend the franchise to 16 and 17-year-olds is not likely to take effect until the spring of 2014, will the Electoral Commission provide advice on how all of those young people will actually be able to register and vote in any referendum?
The Honourable Lady raises a very important point about the potential extension of the franchise to 16 and 17-year-olds. This will be a matter for the Scottish Government to bring forward their detailed proposals on that, and I imagine that the Electoral Commission will, of course, be very closely involved in the guidance that is set out for all voters as we approach the referendum.
Mrs. Eleanor Lang.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that yesterday, in front of the Honourable Gentleman's Scottish Affairs Select Committee, the gentleman who gave evidence on behalf of the Yes to Separation campaign refused to categorically say that his campaign would abide by the advice of the Electoral Commission. What sanctions are there for a government or a parliament or a campaign who blatantly refuse to take the advice of the Electoral Commission?
And Eleanor Lang is the Conservative MP for Epping Forest, in essence.
Anxieties on this particular issue, but I have to say that this government and its predecessors have always followed the advice of the Electoral Commission, and I would expect the Scottish Government to do that as well.
Where?
The Secretary of State has just asserted yet again that no government has ever ignored the advice of the Electoral Commission and implied the Scottish Government might. Far from ignoring it, the Scottish Government has yet to receive its advice, whilst his government has rejected the Electoral Commission's advice on wording referendums and council tax in England. Will he put the record straight now?
I hope I can reassure the honourable gentleman, help him to calm down, because as the Electoral Commissioner John Cormack said on the television only the other weekend, and I quote, "For every referendum that has taken place, the Electoral Commission's advice and question has been accepted." On the issue of the local government referendums, no referenda have taken place. We have already said that we have reflected on the advice from the Electoral Commission and will be bringing forward proposals on that question very shortly.
Leadsom.
Number 3, please, sir.
And this is a question about how business is being promoted abroad from Scotland.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 3 and 12 together. This government is committed to promoting United Kingdom businesses, including in Scotland, around the world. Brian Wilson, the former Trade Minister, is currently carrying out a review of Scottish exporting and has been appointed a United Kingdom Business Ambassador with special focus on Scotland.
Andrea Leadsom.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. And does he agree that as well as promoting business, we also need to support businesses at a time when access to finance is so difficult? So can he tell me what steps he's taking to work with the devolved government to ensure prompt payments in the supply chain, and in particular that the public sector pays private sector suppliers in a timely fashion?
I think my honourable friend makes a very, very important point, and it's certainly something that we as a government are committed to ensure that private sector suppliers are paid on time so that they can make sure that their businesses are sustained. I'm certainly happy to work with the Scottish Government or anybody else in the public sector to ensure that everybody adheres to best practice.
Alan Cairns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What action is the Secretary of State taking to ensure that there is no conflict between Scottish Development International and UKTI when they're using public money to potentially attract companies either side of the border with bigger carrots?
Can I say to my honourable friend that he underlines the importance of trade for the Scottish and UK economies. £22 billion of exports for Scotland. I have to say that's half the value of what we sell into England, Wales and the rest of the UK, so it puts it in perspective. But in contrast to the 21 offices that SDI has in 13 countries, UKTI has 162 offices in 96 countries, and 270 consuls from the FCO are operating in 170 countries. This offers a great network for Scottish business to get the best out of the United Kingdom. I think it's important we work together, but it's clear that we're stronger together, we'd be weaker apart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we've seen, the work that is undertaken here does have an impact on Scottish businesses, both at home and abroad. Can I draw the Secretary of State's attention to the work and troubles that Scottish businesses are currently experiencing? And we now have unemployment in Scotland now higher in Scotland than the rest of the UK. Recent research by the Fraser of Allender Institute reveals another challenge for the Scottish economy and indeed Scottish businesses, and that is that welfare changes in Glasgow alone will remove £115 million from the local economy and lead to a loss of close to 2,000 jobs across Scotland. What does the Secretary of State plan to do about this?
Where I have a shared analysis with the Honourable Lady is that there is a huge mess that has to be cleared up, and that there are significant challenges, some deep-seated problems in the Scottish and UK economies, and real problems on our doorstep in Europe. But what she can't do, as she tries to do every time she comes to the dispatch box, is duck Labour's responsibility for the mess that we inherited. What we are determined to do is make sure that through welfare reform we make work pay, that we support the most vulnerable and we help people into work. We're also determined to make sure we put money back in the pockets of low and middle income Scots. From next April, 162,000 will be taken out of tax altogether, and 2 million will have seen their tax bills reduced.
I could draw the attention of the Secretary of State to some of the comments from his colleagues from the Liberal Democrats, who I don't think share his enthusiasm for the welfare changes, and ask him to focus on the loss of jobs that his welfare changes will bring into Scotland. Perhaps he should be a bit more focused on that. But, Mr Speaker, the truth is that the Government's policies are indeed hitting Scotland hard, and the Secretary of State really has to start addressing the work his government is doing in Scotland. Earlier this month, in a letter to me, the Secretary of State revealed that he is not on one of the government cabinet committees dealing with either the economy or welfare. Last time I questioned the Secretary of State, we had no action in food banks, now no action on Scotland's economy, and it would seem he doesn't understand the impact of welfare changes in Scotland. When are you going to start doing your job in relation to the Scottish economy?
I'm certainly doing my job, but I think the Honourable Lady is referring to the Secretary of State. How he's doing his. The Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Once again, we're going to take no lessons from the Labour Party about the state of the United Kingdom economy. We have a plan that will make sure that we deal with the mess they left us, that gets us back on the right track and gets us sustainable growth, unlike them who have no plan whatsoever.
David Amis, number 4, Mr Speaker.
And this is a question between the talks between the Scottish and UK governments about that independence referendum.
With permission again, Mr Speaker, I will answer questions 4 and 5 together. I have discussed the referendum with the Scottish Government on a number of occasions, most recently on the 15th of October, when Scotland's two governments reached agreement on the process to ensure that there is a legal, fair and decisive referendum.
Amos, Secretary of State agree with me that one of the arguments for separation is based on the false premise that separation would be good for the Scottish economy. Would he agree with me that it would be good for the English economy but not for the Scottish economy?
I certainly agree with my honourable friend that Scotland is stronger as part of the United Kingdom economy. We would be weaker if we were outside it, primarily because we have access to this huge single market which takes twice as many exports, if we call that, as anywhere else in the world. It has the resilience to absorb huge financial catastrophes like the bank collapse, and we have the clout internationally to be at the top table where all the key economic decisions are made. That's far better for Scotland.
John Robertson.
Mr Speaker, I wonder if the Secretary of State agrees with me that last week we saw an example of what happens when you don't listen to the Electoral Commission, in that the debacle on the Police Commissioners' elections with less than 10% in some places and empty boxes. Will the Secretary of State talk to the Scottish Government to make sure that the same debacle doesn't happen in Scotland as happened last week?
Well, funnily enough, I don't agree with him on the example he uses, but on the principle that we should listen to the Electoral Commission and follow its advice, I'm in complete agreement with him.
Tereli Whiteford.
I wasn't particularly standing on this particular issue. I'm happy to ask the Secretary of State.
Mr Wishart, have a go. Come on, let's hear it.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. After clearing up that confusion, can the Minister confirm that following the Edinburgh Agreement, which all parties agreed to, the referendum on independence is now exclusively a matter for the Scottish Parliament and this House has no further role?
I mean, I know that the honourable gentleman always wants to denigrate the Parliament of which he is a part, and I wish he would stop doing that. But point out to him a rather important part of that agreement is that we will pass the Section 30 order, which will transfer the powers to the Scottish Parliament. That will importantly involve debates in this place and another place, as well as the Scottish Parliament. We're all part of this debate, and all Scots will be part of that political process.
Mr William Bain.
Mr Speaker, when the Secretary of State next does meet the First Minister, will he share with them the powerful call made by President Clinton and Secretary Albright when they visited these shores, to remind us that the binds which bind us together are far more powerful than any distinctions in identity? On economic cooperation, wasn't the Institute for Fiscal Studies right to point out that if we want to diversify the Scottish economy away from a dependence on oil and gas revenues, we need not just share a currency and an interest rate, but a powerful and strong fiscal union which benefits Scotland and is the likely result of our shared prosperity in the future?
The honourable gentleman makes two important points. One about how senior international figures, when they look at the issue of confronting Scots, the most important political decision in 300 years, time and again they say they think Scotland would be better as part of the United Kingdom. But the report he highlights is very, very significant in showing the strength of Scotland's economy as part of the UK, both in terms of its opportunity and in reducing the risks attached to it.
Order. There are far too many noisy private conversations taking place, mainly on the opposition benches at the moment. Let's hear from Mark Pritchard.
This is a question from a Tory MP about the role of NATO in Scotland.
Scotland is stronger in defence terms as part of the United Kingdom within NATO. NATO is the bedrock of our national security, and the UK is one of its largest contributors. There is no guarantee that an independent Scotland would gain automatic membership.
Mark Pritchard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What discussions has my right honourable friend held with the Scottish Government concerning the Scottish Government's dialogue with NATO, given that so many within the Scottish Government are anti-nuclear when NATO is a pro-nuclear alliance?
Mr. Speaker, it's not clear that the Scottish Government have had any dialogue at all with NATO about prospective membership. And it is quite clear that membership could not be guaranteed. As the NATO Secretary-General said, the door does not open just because you stand in front of it.
Thomas Docherty.
The South Dockyard in my constituency works for the Ministry of Defence and the Royal Navy. Will the Minister clarify whether, if Scotland was a separate country, regardless of its NATO membership, the South Dockyard would not be getting work from the Royal Navy?
Mr. Speaker, many UK defence contractors benefit from contracts which are exempted from EU procurement rules for national security reasons that have to be placed or competed for within the United Kingdom. Many such contracts have been awarded in the honourable member's constituency, and there is no guarantee that such contracts would be awarded in an independent Scotland.
Campbell.
Does my right honourable friend accept that there's an inherent contradiction between saying that you think nuclear weapons are an obscenity, but at the same time wishing to join an alliance which is based on both conventional and nuclear deterrence? Are not these two positions wholly irreconcilable?
I absolutely agree with the Right Honourable and learned gentleman, and indeed some honourable members of the Scottish National Party, such as MSPs Jean Urquhart and Mr Finney, agree with him because they can't reconcile their positions, but many SNP MSPs continue to sit in government in Scotland when they can't reconcile those two positions.
Ian Murray.
7, please, Mr. Speaker.
And this is a question about the economy.
Mr. Speaker, the United Kingdom Government has reduced the deficit by a quarter. We are taking important steps to promote growth, cutting corporation tax, accelerating infrastructure projects and establishing the Funding for Lending scheme are just some of the range of measures being implemented.
Ian Murray.
Thank you to the Secretary of State for that answer. Does the Secretary of State agree with the recent assessment by the Institute of Fiscal Studies that in the event of a separate Scotland, the economy will not be sustainable in the long term?
I quite agree with the honourable gentleman. We have got a much stronger opportunity to continue as part of the United Kingdom than we do if we go our own separate way.
Sir Robert Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. BAIN have put up for sale Macintosh Donald, the meat processing factory at Portlethen in my constituency that employs 600 people. Will the Secretary of State emphasise to any potential buyer just the excellent reputation the north east of Scotland has for high quality meat production and the importance the factory plays in a route to market for that excellent production?
My honourable friend makes a very important point. Clearly these have been very difficult months for particularly those who have been employed by BAIN at Halls in West Lothian, and now we have the sale of the rest of the group. I'd be happy to meet with him and other Scottish colleagues to discuss the implications, but encourage them, everybody, to see the potential exists in this company, and hopefully we will sustain the jobs that are in it.
Tom Greatrix.
Mr. Speaker, BAIN's decision to cease operations in Scotland also affects up to 400 people in my constituency in Cambuslang. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that it's intolerable for the company to refuse to provide those 400 people who are obviously very anxious about their future with meaningful information? And would he make contact with the company to remind them that they should be making sure that their employees get clarity on their position as soon as possible?
The honourable gentleman makes a very fair point, and I will certainly, on his behalf, take that up and add to his own efforts with the company, and I'll be happy to meet with him in due course to discuss it further.
Mr. Alan Reid, number 8, Mr. Speaker.
And this is a question about superfast broadband in Scotland.
The UK government is committed to delivering the best superfast broadband network in Europe by 2015. As part of this, the Scottish government was allocated over £100 million to support broadband improvements. It is now the responsibility of the Scottish government to deliver on this investment by the UK government.
I'm pleased that this government have allocated over £100 million to Scotland for rural high-speed broadband. Will the Minister please do all that he can to encourage the Scottish Government and Highlands and Islands Enterprise to get a move on and use this money to bring high-speed broadband to the rural parts of Argyll and Bute as soon as possible?
Mr. Speaker, I most certainly will encourage the Scottish Government and all other agencies to get on with it in terms of deployment of rural broadband. My constituents are as concerned as this about his.
Michael Connaughty.
I am very concerned, as everyone is, about all of Scotland getting super-fast broadband. Is the Minister aware that BT are going to use fibre optics in West Lothian and have just announced they're going to roll out copper wire into Bo'ness and parts of my constituency? Copper wire is last century's technology. Will he intervene and talk to BT about running out fibre optic to all parts of Scotland so that super-fast broadband is a reality for everyone?
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to arrange a meeting involving myself, the honourable gentleman and BT to discuss that issue.
Angus Brendan McNeill.
Speaker, in what appears to be a break to the constant scaremongering in this session, can I ask the Minister if he agrees that broadband coverage should be based on broadband coverage percentages should be based on local authority area rather than on national area?
Mr. Speaker, what I think is that the Scottish Government, having been given £100 million by the UK Government to roll out broadband, should get on with it in his constituency and elsewhere.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for at the moment, because the way the parliamentary calendar works, that was in fact the final Scottish Questions of 2012. We'll be back again on Wednesday the 9th of January, so do join us then if you can. But for now, from all of us here at Westminster, goodbye.